Hi, my name is Jens Soering, and in 2023, Netflix released a four-part series about the double murder for which I was convicted. The series is called Till Murder Do Us Part, Soering versus Haysom. And unfortunately, it's really inaccurate. There's a lot of stuff in it that's just not right. So I'm making these videos to set the record straight. And the person who's helping me with this is, amazingly enough, the man who was the senior investigator on this very murder case in the first year. His name is Chuck Reid. He was an investigator for the Bedford County Sheriff's Department back in the 1980s. Decades after the murders, Chuck and I ended up becoming friends. Recently, he wrote a report about the case, which has been published and is available on the internet. And we're going to talk about what happened in the early days of the murder investigation. Chuck, would you please say hello to everybody? Here's senior investigator Chuck Reid.
Hello. Yes, I'm Chuck Reid. I spent quite a few years in law enforcement. I actually started out I was a Marine in the U.S. Marine Corps. I was a firearms instructor at Parris Island, South Carolina, time in the Marine Corps. And then later down the road, I joined the Bedford County Sheriff's Office. And after about my first 2 years with the sheriff's office, I was promoted into investigations, where I worked several homicides during that time. Of course, even after I left the department in April of '86 and returned about a year and a half later, I was not in the investigation unit. I was on the road deputy at the time. Even at that time, as a road deputy, they pulled me from the road to send me to Lynchburg, Virginia to work other homicides. So obviously, maybe I was doing something right. From day one, I've always had my thoughts about this case as far as who was involved and what occurred. When I stepped into the crime scene over there, my first thought was it was a gang of people. There's no way one person could do this kind of damage.
That's an important point that you're already launching into, because, of course, I was convicted of committing this crime by myself. And your first impression when entering the crime scene was that it was a gang of people who did this. More than one perpetrator had to be involved, right?
You know, it's a different thing when you go to a crime scene and you're there and you discuss things with the other officers, and that little things that's said and brought to your attention that's really never been put out to the public to really know. Or you can sit back and be a backseat driver and and make all these accusations and thoughts and want to be an investigator. That's good and fine. But investigators go to schools to learn certain procedures and how to do these things. You know, we just don't step off a corner and go in and start doing it.
Yeah.
Just like attorneys. I've dealt with many attorneys over the years. They go to law school. They have to go by the law, just like a judge. He has to go by the law, the book. That's why he keeps a book, Code of Virginia book, on his desk. So we know what we're doing. Again, my opinion from day one, I always felt that Elizabeth was there. What involvement she had, I mean, I couldn't prove it. I couldn't say because I wasn't there. But I've just always felt that she was there. And the reason for that is because the first 6 months investigation that nobody, that seemed like Ricky and certain ones now have forgotten about, and Terry Wright, the British investigator that helped Ricky the 4 days over there, apparently he's not even aware of that. Because when Elizabeth says, well, I did it, I got off on it, then rather than say, no, you're just joking, basically. He wasn't aware of the 6 months investigation that we looked at a female who was going in a different direction.
And we're going to talk about all the things that point at Elizabeth. But just to give some background, you're not alone in thinking that Elizabeth was at the crime scene. At her trial in 1987, one of her brothers, Dr. Howard Haysom, testified that he thought she was at the crime scene. And Nancy Haysom, that's her mother's best friend, Annie Massey, also testified that she thought Elizabeth was at the crime scene. So you're certainly not, by a long shot, the only person to conclude that Elizabeth was at the crime scene. There's plenty of other people, and you're not alone, is my point. One of the things that I cannot figure out, but why would they leave this out, is on April 18th, I believe, 2018. So this would have been 33 years after the crime, right? And there was this press conference where Stan Lapicus revealed the FBI file, right? Which we're going to talk about. But you were there, and Chip Harding was there. He was the sheriff of Albemarle County. And Richard Hudson was there. He was the detective sergeant from Charlottesville PD. And Stan Lapicus was there. He was a retired FBI agent. So this is 4 law enforcement officers all put together, right? Standing in one room, and the four of you together asked the governor to grant me an absolute pardon. Also on paper, there's a written document as well. But that video exists, and it's in the internet, but it never gets shown. This is one example to me of what was suppressed in the Netflix series. And, you were there. Don't you think that this should have been included?
That I felt should have been included, but I'll have to say that this Netflix I've done about 5 of these things over the years in this particular case, and pretty much all turned out similar, but this Netflix was probably one of the worst. I mean, to me, it's like they'll come in and they're interested in getting to the bottom of this case and really bringing the truth out and getting all the evidence out that the public hasn't heard or been aware of. But then when it comes out, after they interview you for 3 or 4 days or a week or so, naturally they got to cut it back to maybe a 30-minute or a 45-minute section. But they cut out the most important parts that could really give the public a different perspective, I think, on the case. It's like that they're trying to convict you over again, is the way I look at it. That's what myself and someone else was talking about, that friend of mine. If they were really interested in what they wanted to really get out there rather than promote themselves, I think things would be a whole lot better.
I think that's true. I think a lot of this is about making money, of course, and then in order to create tension where there isn't maybe that much tension because the facts are so obvious, they leave out really important evidence, like, for example, the fact that Elizabeth actually said she did it, which is not in the Netflix series. I cannot imagine how they could leave that out. Or the fact that you performed a luminol test on the car. That's not anywhere in the Netflix series. It's just shocking.
Well, it is. That's what I say. I think they put everything together. They decide, well, let's don't put this out there because this might, tell a different story. So let's just keep it here. So to keep people wondering over the years on what went on. Ricky says he'll go to his grave that you did this, committed the murder. He'll go to his grave believing that. Well, my opinion is just as important as his. I worked just as much on that case as Ricky Gardner, but see, the people don't realize that. They don't know about the 6 months investigation prior to him going to England for 4 days and never done an investigation before that or after that.
This is something important to remind people, that the investigation was basically finished in October. And the only other thing that happened after that is that I was interrogated for 4 days. And at my trial, Ricky Gardner testified that after these 4 days of interrogation, there was no further investigation at all of any kind, none. So the only thing that he did that you weren't involved in was these 4 days of interrogation. He did no checking to see whether my confession was accurate. And as an experienced investigator, let me ask you, isn't it normal procedure after somebody gives a statement, a confession, to check that whether the confession is true?
You don't walk in a courtroom on a hope and a prayer, and the judge says, well, how do you know this man did it? And I go, well, because he said he did. Okay, well, what else you got? It don't work out. It doesn't work that way. You need to do a follow-up to find out, okay, if you said this, because you go back to the fact. We can go over it later if you want, but I like to bring these things out now because I'm proud. We might forget it later, not bring it up. At least it'll be in there. Let's go to talk about the bloody sheet. Did you mention that in your false statement? Never mentioned it. The only person that mentioned that was Elizabeth. When you returned to Washington in a sheet covered in blood from head to toe. Okay, yeah, that was a sheet, but you never heard anything about that sheet after that. But Elizabeth knew about the sheet because my opinion was that that's the one that came off the bed there, and that's what was used to wipe the blood up with. So, yeah, that was a bloody sheet, and she knew that in her mind.
I agree. I never said anything about a bloody sheet. I was talking about a sweatshirt, and she said that I arrived in a bloody sheet, and there's a crime scene photo that shows that it looks like a sheet was taken off the bed, and it could very well have been a sheet that wiped up the blood on the floor. And another thing that I know you and I talked about on a previous occasion is that in my statement, my confession, I said that I hit a dog with a car. And Ricky Gardner thinks that this is the absolute proof of my guilt. But I believe that, didn't you walk the road from the Haysom house to Highway 500? What was it, 505? What was that? Where did you row?
Yeah, well, I was going to bring that up next, that myself and about 4 or 5 others that night walked from the loose chippings from the house all the way to Route 501, which is close to a mile maybe. But walked checking both sides of the road, checking the ditches for anything, whether it's for a knife or any kind of weapon or whatever it may be. And of course, myself, I'm an animal lover, and little things like that stick in a person's mind, no matter if it's 50 years ago. Certain little things stick in your mind. But I don't recall ever seeing a dog or any kind of animal in the road dead while we was walking that night.
And nobody else did either?
No, it was never mentioned that until that was brought up by Ricky. That's the first I heard of that.
Yeah. The point is, this was, I explained why I did that. Elizabeth and I were writers, and we both added details to our stories that you call, as writers, a telling detail, something that's so crazy that it's got to be true. That's how you write a good story. And we were trying to persuade the police of something that was not true. So we added details like that. She added the story with the Coca-Cola, that she cleaned the blood out of the car with a Coca-Cola. That's a telling detail. It's a story that sounds so crazy, it's got to be true. And I added the detail with the dog,
Right.
which we know is not true, because you walk the road and check the ditches and there was no dog. So we know that this story that I told, that part of the story at least, is not true, like so many other things in that false confession. But this was not brought out, and it should have been brought out. That's what I feel.
And now for a brief commercial interruption. I fought for justice for 33 years while I was in prison, and I'm still fighting for justice today, after my release, through these videos and through a new pardon petition. There's a method to my madness. In prison, I developed a 7-step program for developing fighting spirit so that I would never, ever, ever give up. Today, I work as a coach, and I teach my clients how to develop that fighting spirit as well. Most of my clients come to me because of issues like career development, toxic relationships, libel, or defamation. But of course, I adapt my program to whatever my clients' needs are. If you're interested in working with me as a coach, please go to my website. I'll check you out there.
Let's go back to what happened on April 3rd, 1985. That's when a friend of Nancy Haysom, called Annie Massey, reported the crime, and then the sheriff's department arrived at Loose Chippings, is what the house was called, and you were one of the first investigators at the crime scene. And what was your first impression when you walked in? What did you think?
Well, the first thing I thought of, it was just so outrageous compared to other homicides that I'd worked. I just never crossed my mind that one person could go in and do something like this.
Because it was so extremely violent.
It was definitely extreme violence. And the reason I looked at it that way is because I'm thinking to myself, I said, these people had to have done something awfully bad in order to deserve something like this. This was up close and personal. It's very obvious. Whoever did this hated these people. And the way I looked at it too, they were both pretty much the same type wounds were to both of them, almost identical. And then I got thinking, well, it was very obvious they hated one just as much as they did the other. And then after that, of course, that same night, I was teamed up with Carol Baker. Each one of us was put in a team with another individual, another detective. And then I pretty much was sent around, myself and Carol, to interview neighbors. And that's the night we walked down the road and checked the side ditches.
So one of the things for people to understand is that Nancy Haysom was in the kitchen and Derek Haysom was in the living room, and in between was the dining room, right?
Correct. And that's the reason that I never questioned it, because they were both, obviously it looked like they were running in 2 different directions, which tells me if it was just one person, that one person can't be in 2 places at the same time. So it's if that you had some individuals dealing with Miss Haysom and she was running away, and you had Mr. Haysom dealing with individuals and he was going in a separate direction.
And the other thing, like you're saying, that you can't be in 2 places at the same time. But the other thing that, I know you and I talked about previously was that there wasn't a lot of stuff knocked around. The chairs were still standing upright. There were glasses on the table and candlesticks on the table. So I think you said that it looked like people managed to keep control of the situation so that things weren't knocked around too badly.
Yeah, again, I looked at it that way. There's obviously enough people there that could control the situation to where there was no big fight. They were running away from inside the dining room, but the candles, nothing was knocked over. But I did notice there was a chair in the dining room and sitting next to the kitchen door. And that kind of, I looked at that as that was kind of out of place to me, because it was sitting in a way, to me, it would have kind of been in a way to walk from the dining room into the kitchen. So it was like somebody was sitting in those chairs having a discussion or something. Yeah, that was just my perspective.
I'm looking at the crime scene sketches right now, and I know exactly what you're talking about. There is a chair that is kind of halfway blocking the door from the dining room to the kitchen, and it is an odd place for a chair to be. You know, there had to be somebody in the kitchen with Miss Haysom and somebody in the living room with Mr. Haysom, because it would be difficult to get around that chair.
Correct. And I just don't think they would leave the chair sitting out in the middle of the floor like that. To me, it would have been against the wall, out of the way.
I see what you're saying. And then another thing that I think is important, and is in your report, the next day, I see the photograph in front of me here right now. They did a luminol test of the shower in Haysom's bedroom. Do you want to talk about that what they found in the shower?
Well, if you look at the pictures, I mean, it's very obvious the shower wall in the bathtub was glowing from the luminol, in the same way with the sink in the bathroom had a tremendous glow from the luminol. So it's obvious that whoever was there, and I got to looking at it too, for somebody to go in and spend enough time to stay there and take a shower after that was done, somebody had to feel comfortable being at the place, knowing that, well, nobody's going to be coming around this time of night, so I got time to do this. So it's like somebody had to be familiar with the place.
But not a stranger.
Correct. Because from the other homicides I've worked, or in any case, actually, 9 out of 10 times, the perpetrator is not going to stand around and take a shower or do certain things like that. He's going to commit the crime and get out of there because they don't want to get caught.
And of course, this does not fit at all with Elizabeth Haysom's statement that I arrived in Washington, D.C., covered from head to toe in blood and wrapped in a bloody bedsheet because the perpetrator showered off the blood. The luminol proves it.
Exactly. Of course, if you check the front yard to the left, if you come out of the front door to the left over the yard, it's very obvious a small area where it looks like somebody just walked around and wiped their feet off, which will luminol, that came out.
That's right. There were bloody footsteps in the grass and on the walkway as well. There's photographs of those that are leading to where a car must have been parked on the driveway.
Yes, that's right.
And right next to those bloody footsteps leading to that car, there's cigarette butts next to the front door there.
There's cigarette butts at the front door as well as the back door. Married cigarette butts. That was Elizabeth's brand from what we were told, and from basically I think what she said.
Yes. On about a week and a half later, she was interrogated. She was smoking Merritt cigarettes during the interrogation.
Right.
So, you got the bloody footsteps that are going past the Merritt cigarette butts.
Think about this thing, and I've had to deal with public for many years, and it's human nature. Most people's gonna believe what they want to believe. I don't care what you tell them or what you show them. That's the bottom line. That's just human nature. But to not realize and really think about the fact of somebody doing that kind of damage to people in a murder, but yet hanging around to go and take a shower
and have a smoke.
Correct. I mean, so that tells me it's got to be somebody that knew the place and knew how things went around there, as far as neighbors coming around or anybody visiting the house. They just felt comfortable. They could go ahead and do what they had to do and then leave.
There is FBI documents, which we're going to talk about in a second, right? Clearly says that Sheriff Carl Wells called the FBI, and it says here, Wells advised that he desired to have the FBI do a psychological profile. And you were at the crime scene when our special agent and profiler, Ed Sulzbach, arrived. Do you want to talk about that? Because you got to meet Ed Sulzbach through all of this, right?
That's how I got to know Ed. Ed is one of the most respected, well-known profilers in the country. Most everybody in law enforcement knows Ed Sulzbach.
I think he helped invent the whole field of profiling. He was one of the inventors of the whole thing. He helped start the behavioral analysis unit at the FBI, which was the profiling unit.
Correct. Yes.
You yourself were there, and you know that Ed Sulzbach did a profile of this case?
Oh, yeah, sure. Because I know over the years, after I was back in the mid-90s, I was transferred over in the corrections unit, and I would go to conferences. And Ed sometimes, like in Virginia Beach, Charlottesville, wherever it may be, it'd be a big conference. And a lot of times Ed would be the speaker there. And he always talked about this case. Matter of fact, if I was there, he would always let everybody know that I was involved with him on the case.
Ed Sulzbach gave an interview for a previous movie where he actually talks about writing a profile, and that it was definitely a written profile, but there's also a document from the FBI that says that the unknown subject was a female who was closely related to the victims. And that's what he actually put in his profile. But then he went on to say that he settled on the daughter, which is Elizabeth Haysom.
I got a phone call from the sheriff in Bedford County. And the different sheriffs and chiefs around the state of Virginia knew me and knew that I was a profiler. And I drove out to Bedford County. My mission was to study the crime and come up with possible suspects. And Mrs. Haysom was wearing her nightgown with a robe. And it occurred to me that Mrs. Haysom would never entertain strangers in such attire. Who might be close enough to her that she would feel comfortable entertaining in a nightgown and robe. We're dealing with somebody's close to these people. And that I suggested to the investigators.
I settled on her daughter because Mrs. Haysom was a very proper woman. And I came to the conclusion pretty quickly that it was someone they knew very well.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, that's basically it, just, what it amounted to. And then again, like I had said earlier, that Elizabeth was pointing the finger at Mary. Mary was pointing the finger at Elizabeth. So that first 6 months, basically on up in probably into August and September, we were looking at possible female subjects, persons of interest, let me put it that way.
It's important to get this nailed down. There is FBI documents that say this, which are in your report. And then there's the interview with Ed Sulzbach, which for some reason that I'll never understand, Netflix did not include in their series, where Ed Sulzbach talks about his profile and that it's a written profile. And then in addition to that, there's your testimony, because you talked to the man and he did a profile, because in later years, Ricky Gardner started saying there was no profile. Can you understand what was going on there?
Actually, that's exactly what I was getting ready to say. I don't understand. Ricky at one time, and the news media picked up on it, was going around saying that he was the lead investigator on the case. Well, I heard all that. I thought it was kind of silly, but I never thought anything about it. It is what it is. I know I was there. I know what I did on the case. But for Ricky, my thing was, okay, if you're going to be a lead investigator and you don't remember the FBI being there, how many other things is it you don't remember? So that was a very important thing, because, again, that was involved in that first 6 months investigation that 90% of the public aren't aware of, because everybody just decides they don't want to hear about that anymore, because I spent 4 days in England and got a false confession. And now we can call back and we can let people in Forest and in Boonesboro and Bedford counties, let them know that, we can solve the case. Everything's fine now. And just don't look back. I guess they figure a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush.
Exactly. There was pressure to solve the case, is what you're saying.
Well, sure it was. Oh yeah, big time. There's a lot of pressure on solving this case.
And there was pressure on Ricky too then.
Well, I would think so. And I think a lot of that, unfortunately, I think the biggest problem right now with Ricky, it's all about his reputation. That's what this is all about. And I think it's others that have come up over the years with their own perspective of the case. It's all about their reputation,
There is actually a scene in this previous movie that Netflix took off the market where they're actually filming you when Ricky calls you at your house and is telling you, Chuck, you got to say that there was no FBI profile because that was exculpatory evidence. I'm going to show that little clip here when we release this video.
Hello?
Hi, man.
Ricky, how you doing?
Chuck, they're coming back now. Chuck, we never did an FBI profile.
Yeah, we did.
No, we didn't.
It was Ed Sulzbach and another special agent. See, that's how I got to know Ed.
Chuck Reid absolutely misspoke when he said there was ever any profile done on this case. It was never a profile done on this case. Now, I don't know how nobody ever wrote anything down.
Chuck, if we had done one of those, that would have been exculpatory evidence.
Be honest with you, I have a copy of some old field reports and stuff.
But obviously there was nothing mentioned in
The profile?
The profile done.
Yeah, it's in there. It's stating that Special Agent Ed Salzback did this, the psychological profile and came back to a female acquaintance and not. There's 4 or 5 different things that's in there.
So you think they have filled one out?
Yeah, I know they have.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Why do you think Ricky was calling you up, trying to let you know, or saying that you ought to say that there was no profile?
Well, I mean, I don't know, because that's the first time Ricky Gardner's calling me in probably 30 years. I'm very familiar with exculpatory evidence. You know, I spent a few years in law enforcement myself. But for him to call and tell me that, I mean, I was shocked, to be honest with you. I didn't know what to say, except for the fact that, well, yes, you know, they did do a profile.
It's in that movie that, you know, where they show that. And to me, what's interesting is that Ricky says if there had been a profile, that would have been exculpatory evidence.
Yes, that's what he told me. He says, well, now, Chuck, he said, if we'd have done that, he said, that would be exculpatory evidence. And I said, well, I mean, I realize that, but it was done.
The reason why that's important, and viewers may not know about this, right? There is a requirement in the law that exculpatory evidence and information is turned over to the defense before the trial. There's no way to get around that. That's the law. You have to do it. A profile, technically speaking, is not evidence because profiles are not admissible in court. But what the law says, it's not just exculpatory evidence, it's exculpatory evidence and information. And a profile is exculpatory information. And there was a requirement to turn that over to my defense lawyer prior to trial so that he could talk to Ed Salzback. But we never heard about this. And my lawyer, we never heard about Ed Salzback or anything like that until 21 years after my trial was the first time we ever heard about Ed Salzback and a profile. 21 years after the trial, that's how long they kept this profile hidden. Let's move on. On April the 8th, this is now 5 days after the discovery of the crime, the officer that you were working with, Carol Baker, found out that the shoe print, LR2, at the crime scene was a woman's size 8, a woman's shoe or a small boy's shoe. That's in his report. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, he went down on his own on that. And well, we asked him to do it. And because he's from Lynchburg, he went through 2 or 3 different shoe stores down there and talked to the managers. And as far as how they fit shoes and this and that and the other, that's basically just what you said. It came back showing as a female or small man's or boy's shoe.
Well, the actual, what they said, it was a woman's shoe or a small boy's shoe and a woman's size 8. The reason I'm focusing on that is because a week later, on April 16th, Elizabeth was questioned by Ricky Gardner, and she told them that she wore a size 8 shoe.
Correct. And then you go back to the point, too, where she was over at the crime scene when I was trying to clean it up and trying to compare her footprint with the footprint over there on the crime scene, too.
Let's get back to that later. I think that's a really important point. Then, of course, we're reaching that stage where, and this is something where you would be directly involved if this had happened, and it did not happen. Donald Harrington, this is a friend of the Haysom family, testified at my trial that 1 week to 10 days after the funeral, and the funeral was April the 7th, right? He said a week to 10 days after that, he went to the sheriff's department and reported that he had seen me with injuries on my face and on my hands, bandages on my hands and a black eye on my eye at the Haysom's funeral.
You had a couple of doctors there. Number one, Dr. Howard Haysom, and believe me, as adamant as he was, he pretty much rode with us if he could try to solve this case. And then you got Dr. Massey. Believe me, but if Dr. Howard Haysom had seen anything out of the ordinary, believe me, we would have known it.
And I was, just for the viewers to understand, I was living in a house, Dr. Massey's house. He was at the Baptist hospital there in Lynchburg. I think he was the chief doctor there. So he was a doctor. And Dr. Howard Haysom was one of the siblings of Elizabeth Haysom. They're both medical doctors. And I was living with them for 5 days. And they didn't report any injuries on me, and neither did anybody else. So,
well, I think I've got a copy of your statement here that you gave myself and Ricky Sunday afternoon, and there's nothing in there.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. If there had been a report about me having injuries, wouldn't you have asked me about that when you interrogated me there in October?
Well, most definitely we would have. Sure.
If somebody had come in a week to 10 days after this crime talking about the victim's daughter's boyfriend, right? The victim's daughter's boyfriend got bruises and bandages all over him. Wouldn't somebody have come look for me and check that out?
Sure. That's ridiculous. That's just a ridiculous statement on his part. I mean, number one is that would have gone back to the fact of the luminol in the car and not found any blood in it.
Yeah.
You know, because if he's saying he's found all this, and then Elizabeth is saying that you supposedly cut your hand or you did this and that and the other, and there's no blood in the car, it's going back to what he's trying to say. That you were injured and bandaged up. If that's the case, I would have found blood in the car, or the luminol actually would have had an effect.
That's actually a good point. I haven't thought about that before. With there not being any police report in the file about this man, right? And him coming kind of up as a surprise witness and the only one at my trial testifying this, right? I know that I talked to Chip Harding about this, right? In another video. He views what the prosecution did there very, very, very critically. And he had really harsh words to say because that man.
Well, if he testified in court to that, all due respect to him, it's a lie. I mean, it's simple as that. Because the bottom line is, the rental car would tell that. If the luminol would have had a reaction in that car, you could tie that back into what he's saying. But there was no reaction to the car.
Yeah, it's good to hear you say that if that's what he testified to, it was a lie. Thank you for saying that, because it's something that I find particularly outrageous, because I know I didn't have any injuries, right? And nobody else saw what he claims to have seen, including medical doctors that I was living with for 5 days.
Yeah, but if that was the case, that would have been a pertinent part of the investigation. We would have known about it. Believe me, I would have known about it. I mean, I would have checked into it.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And there's nothing in your statement that you gave myself and Ricky that Sunday afternoon says anything about that.
Yeah. And
let's say that you came in on your own. I mean, I went through this statement here, just pulling some stuff up.
Yeah. And my point is, if y'all would have asked me if there had been such a report. Obviously, y'all would have asked me, hey, Mr. Soering, hey, Jens, we got a witness who says that you have these injuries. You want to explain why you got these injuries? But you never said that. This is not anywhere in the statement that you got there, the transcript. Ricky never asked me about it a year later in England either.
Like I said, it's the first I heard of it. Yeah. When I think you mentioned it or somebody did.
But it's 4 years later at the trial, of course, that you were not allowed to go into. Of course, Ricky is now saying, it's in the Netflix series, I believe, and it's also saying on German TV, that in April and May, I was avoiding the police. They were trying to find me, but I was evading them and avoiding them.
I spent more time than Ricky did too. I went up into August or so dealing with Mary and dealing with our female persons of interest. We met Elizabeth in September, the last week in September at Charlottesville. We got her footprints and we fingerprinted her again. And we also got a blood sample. And we told her then, I can't remember the exact words, but we might have told her before, and maybe she didn't or whatever. I don't know. It's been so long, but we told her then, said, be sure and tell Jens to contact us. We need to talk to him. And then probably a week, maybe 2 weeks later is when you showed up, because I've got it.
About a week and a half later.
Okay, it's word right here on one of the pages. It says, let me think. We don't want you to feel like we're grilling you. This is Ricky Gardner talking. We're grilling you. We just need the information. And you said, well, no, that's fine. I came down here on my own, free will. I want to cooperate. I've got no problem with that. That's part of one thing in your statement.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the first time I was contacted And I wasn't actually contacted by the Bedford County Sheriff's Department. I was told by Elizabeth, they want to talk to you. And I came straight away.
Right. As far as chasing you all over around trying to find you, I mean, we had so much other stuff going on too. I mean,
I was living openly at UVA the whole damn time. So if anybody wanted to find me, it would have been really, really, really easy just to go to UVA, find me and talk to me. I wasn't hiding out from anybody. And then the semester ended, and Elizabeth, and came out at her sentencing hearing, and you mentioned this earlier. Elizabeth convinced, this is her brothers testifying about this at her sentencing hearing. She actually talked her brothers into cleaning up the crime scene. And then some weird stuff happened. You want to talk about that?
Well, I was thinking that Howard Haysom was strictly against them cleaning it up. They wanted to get professionals to come in to do it, but she was adamant about cleaning it up. And then while she was over there, she took her shoes off and she was preparing her foot with the footprints in the floor over there. Plus, again, my perspective too, by her wanting to clean things up themselves, she could go back and check things out herself and find out what was what and cleaning certain things up that maybe others wouldn't know about.
So you got information that when she was cleaning up the house with her family there, took off her shoes and compared her foot to the sock prints on the floor. What did that make you think about her?
Well, it makes you wonder, why would she even do anything like that? I mean, that's her parents' blood right there on that floor. Why would she be stepping all over that stuff and even doing that? I can't remember. I'm thinking it was Annie Massey that told us that, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure.
At her trial, they said both Dr. Haysom and Annie Massey. That's pretty strange stuff, especially since then it later turned out that there is actually a footprint of hers that resembles that sock print at the crime scene as strongly as my footprint did. And there's, experts who say that it could have just as easily been left by her. And then you got her comparing her foot.
Yeah, it's strange. But again, what I've learned about Elizabeth over the years from that time, it's anything strange doesn't, I mean, it's nothing new to me. Yeah. I think she did a lot of strange things. Of course, you would know that more so than me, but she was a very strange person. Another thing you look at when you're dealing with crime scenes like this, she never showed any emotion whatsoever. Because I was at the school, Thornsbury Elementary School, the night she came in over there. I was standing, actually walking down the hall when she was coming in. But it was just any other time I saw her, when we saw her in Charlottesville, I mean, just no emotion whatsoever. Well, you think about it. You go back and and just read some of the comments that she's made, and the comments she made over to when she was over in Great Britain with the British detectives, stating that she did it, but she was being facetious.
Yeah,
it's very strange.
Well, I all I can say is that she never showed any emotions to me either.
Well, I tell you what, Jens, my thing is I keep pushing this point, and I'll continue to push it. Of course, you got haters out here everywhere. It's the bottom line. It is what it is. Unfortunately, that's the world today, and they have no motive behind why they hate somebody, but they'll make something up even if they really don't have anything. They hear these things and see these things as far as what happened and why it happened, but they come up with their own ideas. Like I said earlier, they're going to believe what they want to believe no matter what.
That's why we're doing this interview. So look, let's wrap this one up. And then in our next session, let's talk about the luminol test of the getaway car. And let's talk about Mary Jane Burton's big report of August 12th with blood test results, and then how you and Ricky questioned me in October, and then I fled the country. So that'll be another section, and then that'll be another solid batch of stuff to cover.